The Olympic Abyss. Carter Hensley, Olympic National Park, Washington, 1984. Isolation was my crucible, a forge where I'd hammer out a life I thought I'd mastered. My name is Carter Hensley, and in 1984, I stood atop a fire lookout tower in Washington's Olympic National Park, a rickety wooden box balanced on stilts 25 feet above the forest floor. It wasn't the postcard idle people conjure, some quaint perch gazing over endless green in serene solitude. No, it was a cell of warped planks and rusted nails, its air thick with the must of old wood and the faint tang of mildew seeping from a sagging cot. A scratched radio hissed static, a duty log sat coffee-stained on a wobbly table, and a shelf held a handful of dog-eared paperbacks, my only companions. The tower clung to a ridge, jagged peaks stabbing the horizon, pines sprawling below like a sea of shadowed spears, their tips swaying in the wind's low moan. By day, it was tolerable, the sunlight softening the edges. By night, it became a void, a claustrophobic fist of darkness tightening around me. I was in my second season, a replacement for Brett, a man who'd crumbled under the weight of the quiet. A few nights before I arrived, he'd radioed the Rangers, voice fraying like a worn rope, babbling about something massive circling his tower. Shadows shifting, noises scraping, a presence he couldn't name. By the time they reached him, he was halfway to town, wild-eyed, refusing to return. They handed me his post with a curt nod. "We need someone up there." No warnings, no details, just a warm body to fill the silence. I'd smirked at the tale then, chalking it up to a mind unmoored by loneliness. I was 32, stubborn as granite, convinced that hard work and a clear conscience could bend the world to my will. The tower would prove me wrong. The first 2 nights passed in a haze of routine. Wind whistled through the pines, a mournful tune I'd learned to tune out, and I scratched weather notes in the log. Temperature dips, cloud drifts, while scanning the woods with binoculars more to stave off boredom than out of duty. The air carried the sharp bite of sap and damp earth, and I'd sip lukewarm coffee from a dented tin mug, letting the solitude settle into my bones like a familiar ache. It was a rhythm I'd mastered, a dance with the quiet I thought I'd won. The third night shattered that illusion. A faint metallic tapping woke me, soft, rhythmic, like a spoon striking steel. Not the wind's random clatter, not branches scraping the tower's legs. I knew those sounds too well. This was deliberate, a heartbeat pulsing from below. I stumbled to the railing, flashlight beams slicing through the inky blackness, its weak glow swallowed by the night. Nothing moved, no glint of eyes or rustle of fur. Yet the tapping persisted, steady as a metronome. I stood there, breath fogging in the chill, until it faded with the dawn. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was an animal. A deer nudging the stilts, a raccoon sniffing the structure. The woods teemed with life. It was a reasonable lie. I scribbled a half-joking note in the log, "Nocturnal drummers at work," and tried to laugh it off. The humor soured by the 5th night. A crash jolted me awake, loud as a felled tree slamming the earth, the tower shuddering under the impact. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed the flashlight, its beam trembling as I aimed it at the cabin door. The wood rattled, hinges groaning as if struck by something massive, a battering ram of flesh and bone. My mind screamed bare, but no growls followed, no snuffling breaths, just a silence so thick it pressed against my skull. Shotgun in hand, its cold barrel a lifeline, I crept forward, the floor creaking under my boots. My breath fogged the air, sharp and quick, as I flung the door open. Nothing but the empty platform stared back, the railing swaying faintly in the wind's dying gasp. Then I saw them. Deep gouges in the door's wood, claw marks raking downward, too precise, too deep for any bear I'd ever known. For parallel slashes, each an inch wide, splintered fibers curling outward like a wound. I radioed the Rangers, voice tight as a bowstring. "Something hit the tower last night. Gouges on the door. Not a bear." Their response crackled through, maddeningly calm. "We'll check in the morning." Morning was a lifetime away, useless against the night's grip. Daylight revealed more. Disturbed soil around the metal legs, Impressions too large, too elongated for a bear's paws, almost hoof-like yet wrong, irregular, as if whatever made them didn't belong to this world. I traced one with my finger, the dirt cold and damp, the edges sharp, and felt a chill that wasn't from the wind. That night, I sat with the shotgun across my lap, the wind dead, the forest a tomb of silence. The air grew heavy, suffocating, pressing down like a hand over my mouth. Around midnight, a shadow moved beyond the tree line, tall, man-shaped, a silhouette against the moon's faint silver. I froze, binoculars trembling as I tracked it. It stepped closer, and its form twisted, hunched, limbs spindly as starved branches, head tilting as if scenting the air. Coarse patches bristled along its back, quill-like, glinting faintly. Porcupine spines, I thought, but too long, too jagged. It raised an arm, thin and impossibly long, and pointed at the tower. My stomach turned to ice, a primal dread coiling tight. It knew I was there, saw me through the dark, through the wood and glass. I didn't move, didn't breathe, hoping it'd pass, but it vanished into the shadows, leaving me clutching the gun until dawn painted the sky gray. The Rangers arrived that day, 2 men in faded uniforms, their faces etched with skepticism. I showed them the gouges, the prints, described the figure, tall, thin, quilled. They nodded, lips tight, and muttered about fatigue, imagination, the mind playing tricks in isolation. "Get some rest," one said, clapping my shoulder. I knew better, felt it in my marrow. The 8th night confirmed it. At 11, a guttural clicking rose from below, wet bones grinding together, a sound that clawed at my skin, vibrating through the stilts into my boots. I gripped the shotgun, climbed the railing, and aimed the flashlight downward. There it was, clawing a metal leg, its skeletal frame taut with knotted muscle, skin stretched like parchment over a cage of ribs. Its back bristled with those quills, black and sharp, and it turned, head twisting at an angle no spine should allow. Neck elongated, face obscured, but eyes glinting like wet stones. It began to climb, jerky yet purposeful, claws scraping steel with a screech that set my teeth on edge. I fired a warning shot, the crack splitting the night, echoing off the peaks. It didn't flinch, didn't pause, its limbs pulling it upward in unnatural spasms. Panic seized me. I aimed for its torso, the blast ripping through it, black fluid spraying the stilts. A sound erupted. Not a scream, not a roar, but a wail that vibrated through my bones, deep and wrong, like the earth itself groaning in pain. It fell, thudding to the ground, but didn't stop, circled the tower, clicking louder, erratic, a predator sizing its prey. I screamed into the radio, "It's here! It's climbing! Send help!" The dispatcher's voice drifted through, detached, "Back up at dawn." Dawn was an eternity away. I barricaded the door with the cot, the table, anything I could drag, and huddled in the corner, shotgun trained on the entrance. Hours dragged, the scratching and clicking relentless, a symphony of torment. It wasn't breaking in, it was toying with me, savoring my fear. The stilts groaned, the wood creaked, and I imagined it tearing the tower apart, plank by plank. When dawn's first rays pierced the horizon, the noises stopped, abrupt as a snapped thread. I stepped outside, legs trembling, and scanned below. The creature was gone, but the ground was littered with shredded bark, animal carcasses. Rabbits torn open, a deer's leg gnawed to bone. A message scrawled in blood and ruin I couldn't decipher. The Rangers returned, rifles slung, faces harder now. They saw the mess, the claw marks climbing the stilts, but said little. I quit on the spot, packed my gear, and left, the full truth locked behind my teeth. They wouldn't believe it anyway. Months later, word trickled back. Jonas, the next lookout, vanished from that tower. His cabin was a shambles, metal legs bent like straw, his shotgun snapped in half. No body, no trace, just the forest, silent and waiting. It's still out there, a shadow I'll never outrun. The Gila Enigma. Sam Voorhees, Gila National Forest, New Mexico, 1997. Solitude was my cathedral, a vast chamber where the world's noise faded to a reverent hush. My name is Sam Voorhees, and in 1997, I took sanctuary in a fire lookout tower in New Mexico's Gila National Forest. A skeletal perch of weathered wood and rusted bolts rising above a sprawl of pine, jagged cliffs, and a SK. Why so thick with stars it felt like peering into infinity's throat. The tower was a relic, its planks groaning under my weight, its single room a cramped shrine to routine. A cot sagging in the corner, a scratched radio spitting static, a dented stove where I'd brew coffee, its bitter steam curling in the chill air. A logbook sat on a splintered table, pages yellowed and curling, where I'd scrawl the day's minutiae. Wind gusts, temperature drops, the occasional plume of smoke snaking above the canopy. I'd always been a loner, drawn to the quiet's embrace, and the view, endless green pierced by rocky spires, was a sermon in itself, a testament to nature's cold indifference. That morning dawned with the usual cadence. Coffee bubbling over the stove, its acrid scent mingling with the pine resin drifting through the cracked window, and a slow climb up the tower's ladder, binoculars slung around my neck like a priest's stole. My shift was a ritual. Scan for fire, log the weather, trade garbled words with Ben, the ranger at the base station 30 miles off, his voice a lifeline through the radio's hiss. I'd settle into the chair, its springs creaking, and let the forest's rhythm wash over me. The rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a hawk, the wind's low hum through the cliffs. But by mid-afternoon, something snagged my gaze through the lenses. A tent, stark white and oversized, glowing like a beacon in a clearing 6 miles west. It wasn't a camper's rig. Too large, too conspicuous against the forest's muted greens and browns. More like a circus tent pitched in defiance of the wild. No smoke rose, no figures stirred. It sat there, an anomaly gnawing at my calm. I radioed Ben, voice steady despite the unease prickling my spine. Got a tent out there, 6 miles west. Why big too big? You know anything? His reply crackled through, casual as ever. Nothing on my end. I'll swing by tomorrow. I jotted it in the log. Unidentified tent, 6 miles W, white, no activity, and tried to shake the doubt festering in my gut. Dusk draped the forest in shadow, the air cooling to a sharp edge, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine sap. I paced the tower's narrow deck, binoculars dangling, the tent a pale smudge in my mind's eye. Night fell hard, a curtain of black swallowing the cliffs, and around 2, the forest hushed. An oppressive silence, no crickets chirping, no leaves rustling, just a void pressing against my ears like a hand over my mouth. I grabbed the spotlight, its beam a frail lance against the dark, and swept it toward the clearing. The tent wasn't white anymore. Streaks of dark red slashed its fabric, glistening wetly, fresh as spilled paint under the harsh light. My stomach plummeted, a cold sweat beading on my brow. I fumbled for the radio, urgency cracking my voice. Ben, that tent. It's covered in blood. Something's wrong out there. His comm cut through the static. Stay put, Sam. I'm out at first light. Hours crawled by, my eyes locked on the clearing, the spotlight trembling in my grip as I traced the red streaks, their edges dripping into the dirt below. The forest remained a tomb, the silence a weight I couldn't shake. At 4, movement jerked me alert. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, lurched from the woods near the tent, its limbs twitching in mechanical spasms, like a marionette jerked by unseen strings. Through binoculars, its face blurred, half-formed, a smudge of shadow where eyes and mouth should have been, a void staring back. It bent, dragging something heavy, a sack or a body, toward the tent, its motions deliberate yet disjointed, as if it hadn't mastered its own frame. It vanished inside, the tent's flaps swallowing it whole, and I gripped a rusty hatchet, its weight a cold comfort against my thigh. I stood there, breath shallow, watching until dawn's gray light flattened the tent into the earth. Empty, abandoned, the red streaks dulled to a crusty brown. Ben arrived at 9, grizzled and cigarette lit, his good humor a mask that slipped when we reached the site. The tent was shredded, blood pooling in the dirt, flies buzzing over unrecognizable chunks. Flesh, bone, something torn apart with surgical precision. The air reeked of copper and rot, a stench that clawed at my throat. Ben swore under his breath, kicking a flap of canvas, and pulled out his radio, calling for backup. "Stay put," he said, but I couldn't. Followed him along a trail of broken branches and bloody smears leading deeper into the woods. The tracks weren't human, long, clawed impressions, uneven, like an oversized bird dragging a limp leg. A mile in, we found it. Not a sack, but a body, face stripped clean to the skull, rib cage cracked open like a crab shell, organs glistening in the sun's weak rays. A snapping sound, branches breaking, jerked us around. It stepped from behind a tree, towering 8 feet. Its skin mottled gray, stretched tight over a skeletal frame, arms ending in jagged claws. Its head was the worst. A smooth slab, featureless save for a gaping vertical slit where a mouth should have been, stretching wider as it advanced. Ben fired, his revolver barking, the first shot tearing its shoulder, the second its leg. It dropped to one knee, a guttural scream vibrating through my bones, but kept coming. I ran, cowardice overriding loyalty, and made it back to the tower, slamming the door, locking it with shaking hands. Through the window, I saw Ben stumble from the trees, clutching his side, the creature limping behind, gaining ground. He reached the ladder, started climbing, but it swiped his legs, dragging him down with a wet crunch I won't describe. I leaned out, hatchet raised, screaming at it, but it didn't glance up, just tore into Ben, blood pooling around the ladder's base. I stayed there, frozen, until rangers arrived hours later, rifles and flares in hand. The creature was gone, leaving claw marks etched deep into the wood. Ben's remains a grisly testament. They called it a bear attack, hauled me to a desk job. But hikers still vanish in Gila, tents mangled, bodies unclaimed. It's out there, a hunger without end. The Gifford Descent. Nolan Drexler, Gifford Pinchot National Forest, Washington, 1987. Isolation was my luxury. A bomb wrested from a childhood of noise and chaos. My name is Nolan Drexler, and in 1987, I perched 50 feet above Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a Washington wild of dense pines and shadowed groves stretching beneath a sky bruised with summer heat. The tower was a skeletal frame, its ladder creaking with every step, its cabin a box of warped wood and cracked windows, the air thick with mildew and the faint smoke of a stove I rarely lit. That summer burned dry, the forest taut with tension. A red flag season, they called it, though no flames had yet erupted. My days were a rote liturgy. Scan the horizon for smoke, log the stillness, listen to the wind's low moan through the trees, its voice a constant companion. Hikers passed below occasionally, their chatter a fleeting tether to a world I'd left behind. Midday brought a scream, sharp, human, soaked in terror, echoing from the western trail. I scrambled for binoculars, pulse quickening, but the hikers I'd spotted earlier, 2 figures with backpacks and sun hats, were gone, the trail empty. I scanned up and down, the lenses trembling, but found nothing, no movement, no color against the green. For a moment, I wondered if it was an animal, a hawk's cry warped by the wind, but my gut knew better. It was a sound of raw fear, a plea cut short. I radioed the district, voice tight. Scream on the west trail, hikers missing. Sending someone, their reply crackled through, tinged with doubt. Sure it wasn't a false alarm? We'll check tomorrow. Tomorrow was too late, a hollow promise against the dread pooling in my chest. Against protocol, I descended, hatchet in hand, flashlight clipped to my belt, the forest swallowing me in its damp embrace. The trail wound steep, underbrush clawing at my boots, the air thick with rotting leaves and pine sap, a scent that clung like damp cloth. Half an hour in, a hiking pole lay snapped by the path, its aluminum glinting dully. Nearby, a backpack was torn open, energy bars scattered, a crumpled map, a flashlight rolling in the dirt. No blood, but too deliberate, too clean for a bear's chaos. I folded the map into my pocket, fingers brushing its creases, and pressed on, the silence growing heavier, broken only by the snap of twigs underfoot. Dusk settled, the sky bruising purple, and claw marks appeared, jagged, wide, gouged into tree bark, too high, too precise for any beast I knew. Piles of disturbed soil dotted the path, as if something had clawed the earth apart, roots upturned in frantic bursts. Near a clearing, a body sprawled, face down, limbs twisted at unnatural angles, back raked open, not mauled but carved with a precision that chilled me. Blood soaked the ground, drag marks trailing into the underbrush, a dark smear I couldn't follow. Bile rose, sharp and bitter. I backed away, hatchet trembling, the forest a cathedral of silence now, its congregation gone. A clicking rose, sharp, rhythmic, stones tapping together. From the trees, growing closer. Shadows darted, low and jerky, then a creature crossed the trail. Dog-sized, bark like skin mottled gray, elongated limbs built for upright strides yet scuttling on all fours, its movements a grotesque ballet. More emerged, their clicking multiplying, surrounding me in a tightening ring. I ran, the trail endless, branches slashing my face, their chorus a cacophony of pursuit. One lunged, claws glinting. I swung the hatchet blindly, feeling it sink into flesh, a wheeze hiss erupting as it retreated. At the tower, I scrambled up, legs burning, and bolted the door, lights off, their scratches testing the metal supports below. Hours passed, the clicking circling, probing, then a battering ram hit the door, splintering wood. One clawed inside, bark like skin glinting. I flared it, the emergency gun's red arc igniting its flesh. It screeched, thrashing, flames spreading to the others, scattering them in crackling ruin. Dawn showed a wrecked tower, dark streaks staining the floor. Not blood, but something thicker, blacker. Rangers found 2 bodies, blamed bears, dismissed my tale. The marks remain, a testament. They're still out there, waiting. The Rocky Hunger. Edward Kern, Saddleback Ridge, Rockies, undated. Solitude was my armor, a quiet shield against the world's clamor. My name is Edward Kern, and for 5 years, I'd perched atop fire lookout towers scattered across the Rockies. Their skeletal frames my refuge amid black forests and star-strewn skies. The tower on Saddleback Ridge was my latest post. A weathered box of planks and steel stilts clinging to a granite outcrop, its cabin a sparse cell of routine. A cot with a threadbare blanket, a radio spitting static, a stove where I'd coax weak flames from damp wood, its smoke curling into the crisp air. The view was endless, pine-choked valleys rolling beneath jagged peaks. But it was the silence I cherished, a vast, unbroken hymn that drowned the noise of my past. Last June, that silence turned traitor. The night began sticky, the air heavy with summer's hum. Cicadas droning, leaves rustling in a faint breeze, the forest alive with its own pulse. I'd finished logging the day's report, temperature spikes, cloud cover thinning, and settled into a creaking chair with a battered copy of The Old Man and the Sea, its pages yellowed from countless reads. Around 11:30, a flicker caught my eye through the window, a pinpoint of light, too steady for lightning, too localized for a storm. It danced low in the tree line, a mile out, where no trails wound and no permits allowed campers. Poachers, I thought, or kids testing the wild's edges. My job demanded I check, so I grabbed my flashlight, its beam a frail sword against the dark, and clipped the flare gun to my belt, leaving the rifle propped against the wall. 5 years without needing it had dulled my caution. The descent was slow, boots crunching gravel on the tower's steps, the forest's hum fading to an unnerving hush as I hit the ground. The air shifted, carrying a sharp metallic tang, rust and spoiled meat, a stench that tightened my gut. I called out, "Hello!" Voice brittle, swallowed by the trees. But no answer came, just the rustle of my own breath. The smell grew stronger as I pushed toward the light source, flashlights slicing through underbrush, roots snagging my boots like skeletal hands. A clearing emerged, small and ragged, holding a half-collapsed tent. Canvas torn, stakes bent, and a cold fire pit ringed with scattered cans. A backpack ripped wide. A shoe lay nearby, stained dark, reeking of that metallic rot, its laces shredded as if clawed apart. A low, wet crunch broke the stillness. Bones snapping under pressure, deliberate and close, just beyond the clearing where the pines thickened. Every muscle screamed to turn back, but my flashlight betrayed me, sweeping forward to land on something hunched and moving. At first, I thought bare, broad shoulders, thick limbs, but its skin was a sickly mottled gray, stretched taut over knotted muscles, arms too long, dangling past its knees. It fed, head buried in a man's torso, the body splayed like a butchered deer, ribs split open, glistening red in the beam. The thing's face snapped up, flat, lipless, a maw of jagged teeth stretching wide. No eyes I could see, just a void sniffing the air. It let out a sound, metal ripping, a shriek that clawed my ears and charged. Instinct kicked in. I stumbled back, fumbling the flare gun, its trigger cold under my thumb. The flare hit its chest, a red bloom igniting the gray skin, and it recoiled, shrieking louder, a sound that shook the trees. I ran, boots pounding dirt, branches snapping behind me as it pursued, its footfalls heavy, relentless. The tower's flood lamp glowed ahead, a beacon in the dark, and I scrambled up the steps, two at a time, slamming the trapdoor shut. The structure shook. Claws raked the wooden supports, a force that rattled the stove, toppling my book to the floor. I grabbed the rifle, aimed out the window, and fired, once in the shoulder, once in the leg, the third shot catching its neck. It collapsed, twitching, wheezing a final breath, then went still. I descended at dawn, rifle trembling, to see it up close. Its body sprawled awkwardly, one arm bent at an impossible angle, skin translucent in patches, veins pulsing faintly beneath, like something unfinished, half-formed. Claws gleamed, sharp as gutting knives, crusted with blood. I radioed backup, voice shaking. Something's dead below the tower. Not a bear. Send help. Rangers arrived hours later, grim-faced, loading the thing into a reinforced truck. They saw it, touched it, no questions, just a curt order to keep quiet. Officially a rogue bear. But no bear left those claw marks climbing the stilts. No bear tore that tent with surgical precision. Its kin are out there, unseen, waiting in the Rockies' black heart. The Desolation Stalker. Cal Forester, Desolation Wilderness, Nevada, undated. Silence was my covenant, a vow I'd sworn to the wild. My name is Cal Forester, and for 3 months, I'd manned a fire lookout tower in Nevada's Desolation Wilderness. A barren stretch of scrub and pine perched on a ridge, its tower a weathered sentinel of planks and rusted steel. The cabin was sparse. A cot with a lumpy mattress, a radio crackling faintly, a table where I'd logged the day's nothing, wind shifts, cloudless skies, the occasional hawk circling below. The forest felt abandoned by November, stripped of summer's bustle. No tourists, no buzzing insects, just a deep, oppressive quiet that gnawed at the edges of my mind. I'd signed up for uneventful, a solitary gig to escape a life I'd rather forget. Last night proved I'd misjudged the bargain. The day began gray, the sky a bruised purple slab, too late for hikers, too early for snow to clog the trails. I'd grown twitchy in the silence, pacing the tower's perimeter, checking the radio's hiss, scanning the tree line with binoculars to fend off a creeping unease. At 3:30, the radio crackled, "Tower 16, come in." Dave, from the main ranger station, his voice too calm. "Yeah, I'm here," I replied, leaning into the mic. "Got a hiker missing," he said. "Empty tent, backpack, couple miles south of you. Can you sweep?" I sighed, agreed. Missing hikers were routine, usually just lost souls. But Dave's tone lingered, a shadow in his words. By 4, I was geared up, pack slung over my shoulder, flashlight in hand, flare gun on my belt, rifle strapped across my back for mountain lions I'd never seen. The air bit cold, the forest a skeletal sprawl under the fading light. The site was a slump of canvas. A tent collapsed inward, sleeping bag untouched, clothes folded neatly beside a granola bar, pristine in its wrapper. The backpack lay nearby, contents dumped in a careless heap. No tracks leading away, no sign of struggle. Then I saw it. A shred of something snagged on a branch beyond the tent. Pale, thin, not fabric but human skin, peeled and hung like a trophy, its edges curling in the dry air. A low, rhythmic clicking broke the stillness. Bone on bone, deliberate, measured, echoing from deeper in the woods. My pulse quickened. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Voice brittle, unanswered. The clicking stopped, and a reckless anger surged. Anger at the absurdity, at the loneliness. I followed it, flashlight beam trembling, trees thinning into a sloping clearing. There it stood, human-shaped but wrong. 7 feet tall, torso impossibly thin, head flattened with ridges like cracked stone, limbs swaying loosely, skin scratched and sanded raw. It stared, or seemed to, eyeless yet fixed on me, a predator sizing its prey. I froze. It ran, jerky yet fluid, a marionette in a seizure. I screamed, stumbled back, firing the rifle, the shot missing wide. It lunged, and I fired the flare gun, the red arc punching its chest, igniting its ragged skin. It staggered, whistling shrilly, flames smoldering, but pursued, slower now. I sprinted to the tent, reloaded the flare gun, and hid behind a rock outcropping, breath ragged. It closed in, neck flaring where I aimed next. The flare tore through, lighting it like a grotesque lantern. It flailed, tore the flare free, and lashed out, claws slicing my shoulder. I swung the rifle like a club, bashing its head, blows raining until it convulsed and fell still, twitching in the dirt. Bloody and half-mad, I staggered to the tower, radio crackling with Dave's demands. "Where you been?" I didn't answer, just watched the sunrise bleed over the horizon. The creature's body lies in that clearing, slumped where I left it. Rangers can deal with it, but I know it's not alone. The silence hides more. The Huron Twins. Lewis Hearns, Hiawatha National Forest, Michigan, 1993. Quiet was my rhythm, a pulse I'd tuned to the wild's heartbeat. My name is Lewis Hearns, and since the late 80s, I'd worked as a fire lookout in Michigan's Hiawatha National Forest, its vast expanse of pine and swamp my sanctuary. The Osborne Tower was my post in October 1993. A rickety relic from the 40s, its steps creaking, wind whistling through slats, cabin a cramped nest of cot, radio, and logbook. The work was mundane. Logging weather, scanning for smoke, jotting the forest's empty hymns. But it suited me, a man who'd always craved the smallness of solitude. That night, the forest reminded me who truly held dominion. Noon brought heavy gray clouds, rain spitting lightly, then harder, streaking the windows with tears. At 2, the radio buzzed. A hiker missing near Bear Creek Trail, 6 miles north. Rangers escalated fast, unusual urgency for a routine vanish, and asked for eyes on the horizon. Binoculars showed nothing through the haze, just mist clinging low, shifting too quickly, alive with unseen motion. Twilight deepened the unease, and the radio crackled again. Gary Poulter, a ranger combing Bear Creek, had gone silent, his last words about deep human tracks. Heavier than they should be, then static. I descended, flashlight 1984 flashlight cutting through the darkening mist. The air damp with rot and wet bark, a wrongness growing, birdsong silenced, trees still as death. Near the creek, Gary's torn hat rested on a branch, mud-soaked. His smashed radio lay further down, gouges in the dirt like something dragged. I should have turned back, but pressed on to a clearing. 2 figures stood. One 7 feet, pale and translucent, Bone-ridged head stretched grotesquely, the other smaller, crouching, dragging Gary's lifeless body, face frozen in terror. A branch snapped underfoot. They turned, insect quick, and I bolted, adrenaline pumping, their guttural panting closing in. At the tower, the larger one climbed, claws gripping rungs. I swung the fire axe, sinking it into its shoulder, then flared its chest, flames engulfing it. The smaller fell to my axe, black ichor sprang. Rangers found their charred remains, Gary's body, a nightmare etched in flesh and fire. More lurk in that forest's depths. The Deschutes Phantom. Wyatt Ferris, Deschutes National Forest, Oregon, 1985. Solitude was my lens, sharpening a mind dulled by chaos. My name is Wyatt Ferris, and in October 1985, I manned a fire lookout tower in Oregon's Deschutes National Forest. A creaky wooden perch with a narrow staircase, its cabin a sparse haven of radio, cot, and kitchen. The quiet was my balm. Days spent scanning for smoke, evenings tinkering with the radio's static hum. That night began with a sour stench, rotting meat seeping through the cracks. Then silence, the forest's rhythm snuffed out, crickets mute, air charged with unseen eyes. Stepping onto the balcony, flashlight in hand, I swept the clearing. Nothing, until a glint flickered, gone in a blink. A rhythmic thumping climbed the stairs, deliberate, not human. I shouted, axe gripped tight, but the tower shook, a massive force ramming it. A spider-like thing crouched below. Long claws, skeletal grin, skin stretched tight. It climbed, claws scraping. I swung, black fluid spraying, then flared it, sizzling its flesh. It rammed the supports, the tower groaning. I drove it off with axe and desperation, fleeing to the truck, its clicks fading. Rangers found the wreck, black smears, splintered wood. It's alive, stalking still. From Olympic to Monongahela, the tower's bare scars, gouges, black fluid, torn flesh, a gallery of terror etched into America's wilds. Something relentless stalks these heights, a hunger beyond reason. Could you sleep in a tower, shotgun trembling, hearing clicks below? Would you climb those steps, knowing what waits in the shadows? The forbidden excavation unearths this nightmare, daring you to face the damned.